This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Well, I was not planning on making this a segment on the show, but given the nature of what happened this week in the wrestling news, it's kind of a priority to talk about. And since I already pre-recorded everything before the Friday show, that's why you didn't hear me mention anything about it then. Because I had everything in the can by Wednesday night. And by the time the news hit, I was too late to do any post-production. So unless you're living under a rock, Hulk Hogan, he passed away at the age of 71. I believe it was Thursday morning when they officially pronounced him dead. The autopsy report stated that it was cardiac arrest. And since I've had a few extra days to let things settle, there's been some other information surfacing about what could have potentially led to it. Although nothing's been officially confirmed, so take it with a grain of salt. Apparently Hogan had undergone major spinal fusion surgery in the past month, which I didn't even know about. I'm well aware of his previous 75 other back surgeries he's had since like 2010. God, I'm still old enough to remember seeing him walk out on Spike TV when he was still working for TNA. You seen him out there with that giant back brace on. And he looked old and crippled back then. It's almost impractical to think that he lived another 15 years when he was in that shape then. And there's still a lot of unanswered questions that I think people still have regarding Terry's health. Wasn't there that report that came out from Bubba the Love Sponge saying that Hogan was on his deathbed? And at the time, I think most people just kind of blew it off because it was Bubba the Love Sponge talking. He doesn't exactly have a reputation for being a trustworthy, good-hearted Samaritan. Now I'm starting to think that there may have been more to the story. It's been this strange, bizarre cycle of trying to keep everything under the radar. On the one hand, you got Hogan doing all these publicity tours and sponsorship appearances for various products. And for the most part, I think he's been present for the majority of those appearances. But then you're also hearing conflicting reports that Hogan hasn't been looking very good lately and things are possibly taking a turn for the worse. His family has been abnormally quiet about Hogan's health, even prior to his death. So you're trying to make sense of what's really going on here. Is Hogan fine? Or are his friends and family railroading people into not asking questions to try to keep everything under the radar? Because now that he has actually passed away, somewhat unexpectedly, those same people are going to be hitting harder with the same exact questions and concerns. I mean, yes, there's the argument of right to privacy, but there was just so much shady stuff going on. And on top of that, there's obviously the discussion about the polarizing nature of Hulk Hogan / Terry Bollea. I guess in a way you kind of have to remove kayfabe to get a true perspective on who the guy was. If you followed Hogan's track record outside of the ring in the later stages of his career, it hasn't been exactly flawless. It wasn't that long ago he was seen coming out on the Raw Netflix debut and getting booed out of the building by the Los Angeles crowd. Still hard to imagine that was the final appearance for Hulk Hogan in a pro wrestling ring. Was him getting lambasted and trounced by a hostile LA fan base. Which is not to say the LA fans were exclusive to that level of hatred. I mean, they just happen to be in the vocal minority to speak for many other people across the country. And listen, I'm not going to sit here for the next 20 minutes and make this a Hulk Hogan hit piece. For one, I don't really think it's productive. I have my own personal thoughts and opinions on the guy. But, you know, for every 50 people that would enjoy hearing me rip into Hogan and call him a pathological liar and a con man, 50 more people would be sitting there hating on me in the comments saying that Hogan is the reason that the wrestling business exists in the manner that it does today. And while, yes, two things can be true at once, both of those statements are factually accurate. The problem is that as I've gotten older, I've come to learn that people really don't want to hear opposing arguments or differing opinions other than theirs. They just want to hear their opinion come out of your mouth. And I don't play that game. I find it incredibly annoying and disingenuous. The go along to get along crowd. Fuck that. I don't care what side of the fence you fall on. So let me just get this out of the way so we can move on with the bigger picture. No, I don't personally or professionally like Hulk Hogan. I was never a fan growing up, and I never will be. Not only was he a few years ahead of my time, but I also didn't grow up liking the WWF product. It wasn't until I saw the Undertaker debut when I started to actually watch the WWF more and start to quickly realize why I like WCW and territory wrestling a lot more, even though Taker is still my all-time favorite. For me, it was guys like Flair, the Horseman, Dusty, the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express, Freebirds, Sting. Those are my guys growing up. And then eventually later on, the Austins and the Foleys and the Rocks of the world. Does that not make me a true wrestling fan because I never endorsed Hogan or became a Hulkamaniac? No. It just means that I didn't grow up liking cornball sports entertainment. And likewise, does that also mean that I can't accept how important or monumental Hogan was to the wrestling business? Especially at the height of the national expansion in '84? Of course not. I'd be an idiot for not recognizing Hogan's impact on the business. Like him or hate him, you can't logically or empirically say that he wasn't the biggest draw in the wrestling industry, even above Bruno. Empirically, he was the biggest box office draw and ticket seller in wrestling history. Nobody else can claim that statistic. At least in the manner in which the wrestling business existed in the 80s. You know, sure, before television, you could go back further and talk about the biggest box office attractions then, but in terms of what we saw on a national scale, Hogan was the guy. Now, I wouldn't rank him number one on my list of greatest professional wrestlers of all time. I think even Hogan at one point stated that he was still number two behind Flair. Probably the one thing Hogan never actually lied about in his life. But I also don't know if he was just trying to be humble or not. It's not to say that I haven't genuinely enjoyed watching Hulk Hogan matches in my lifetime. I won't even go into his Japan work. I mean, Christ, for all the people out there that still claim Hogan could never work and he was all just sizzle without the steak, go watch some of his early matches from New Japan with guys like Tatsumi Fujinami and even Andre. And they're not five-star classics or anything, but hell, it completely invalidates every dumbass comment about Hogan being lazy or not being able to dissociate between a headlock and a headlamp. Bret Hart. And I could rattle off like 10 matches off the top of my head that I would consider all-time great Hulk Hogan matches, just from here in the States. Bash at the Beach 96 and the iconic heel turn. Yeah, that's probably a bad example, because Hogan didn't actually come out for that match until the very end when he dropped the leg on Savage. But let's be honest, too, that's the only thing people actually remember about that fucking match. I couldn't even tell you all three guys that were on the babyface team at that time. It was Savage, Sting, and somebody else. Was it Luger, Flair? I don't even remember. Doesn't matter, that's the point. Yeah, there's obviously Rock and Hogan from WrestleMania. That's a pretty iconic match for the fan reaction alone. The unpremeditated double turn when the fans booed Rock and cheered Hogan despite that it was supposed to be the other way around. And you know, there are some dark horse matches too. I mean, people might not even really remember it because it was so long ago and that whole time period for the WWF was sort of left and forgotten about. It was post-Invasion, and Vince had run off so many fans because of the botched Invasion storyline. But Hogan had a pretty damn good run in that 2002, 2003-ish time frame, I think it was. Now, that was when they did Rock and Hogan and Mania. But I vaguely recall seeing Hogan work with guys like Brock and Angle and Jericho. Didn't he team up with Edge at some point? I think he and Flair worked a little bit together at some point down the road. The Mania match with him and Vince, I still consider that a WrestleMania classic. Mostly in that it probably should have been 10 times worse than it wound up being. It was actually a great match, all things considered. And granted, those were all in the twilight of his career. But that last big hoorah run for him, I think I honestly enjoyed that period of Hogan's career more than I did just about anything he ever did in WCW. I mean, the only two things I truly ever loved about Hogan's work in WCW outside the Bash at the Beach turn, it was him and Luger on that episode of Nitro when Hogan dropped the world title for all of like 7 days. And then obviously there's him and Goldberg in '98 at the Georgia Dome. And that was solely for Bobby Heenan's reaction when Goldberg actually won the title. And it wasn't just that Hogan lost those two matches. It was that he did business the right way for a change during a time when the inmates were running the asylum and Hogan was just being pounded and pounded down people's throats left and right. As was the NWO period, which is when the novelty started to wear off with me. But, I mean, look, this all goes back to the conversation at the beginning. Are you willing to differentiate between the two personalities? Yes, it's kind of ridiculous on its face when Hulk Hogan and Terry Bollea are technically the same person. I get that. Normally, pro wrestlers are just extensions of their own personalities. You know, unless you worked for Vince at some point and were given some ridiculous gimmick. Obviously, when it comes to Terry's personal life, whether it's the sex tape scandal, some of his comments about race, the list of pathological lies that are way too numerous to rattle off in a 15-minute segment. Those things are never going to go away. And for a lot of people, I completely understand that that's the bone of contention. So many people have washed their hands of Hogan altogether, and whether he's dead or alive, it probably doesn't matter to those people. I think Hogan's done a lot of scummy shit throughout his life. I think a lot of famous celebrities have done a lot of scummy shit in their lives. I was just naming a few of Hogan's more notable transgressions. I personally don't even give a fuck about the whole Trump endorsement. I voted for the guy, but that had nothing to do with Hogan endorsing him. I just couldn't stand the idea of listening to cackling Kamala for 4 goddamn years. Not after how badly the Biden administration ran this godforsaken country into the ground. You know, whether or not Hogan was ever a Trump supporter, it never made me see him any differently. I still never liked the guy. I never bought the whole I found Christ story. You know, that's the same excuse women use when they sleep around in their 20s, and then once they realize that they made bad choices in life, then they try to pull the I found God card, expecting people to forgive them and look past it. I'm too pragmatic to forgive bad choices. Just because you claim to have found a faith doesn't excuse the fact that the bad behavior is still out there. You don't erase that. And the problem with Hogan is just nothing ever seemed genuine from him. I mean, he can claim to be a man of God all he wants, but who's going to believe him? Not after his track record. So I'm just going to leave it at this. I'm not a completely heartless prick. I'm smart enough to know that there are plenty of people affected by this, not directly related to any of Hulk Hogan's fans. You know, we're talking about family and friends here, too. People that were very close to Hulk and knew him on a personal level. Those are the people that I currently grieve for. His wife, his kids, any blood relatives. People like Eric Bischoff and Jimmy Hart. I empathize with those people the most. So understand where I'm coming from here. The wrestling business lost a true legend and icon this past week. Arguably the biggest legend/icon in the past 50 years. Losing Bruno was tough. But even he has not received the type of outreach and publicity that Hogan has. Warrior, Savage, Dusty, none of those guys have been covered in the mainstream to the level Hogan has. He wasn't just a big star in wrestling. He was a celebrity in the movie industry, television, the music scene, charities, sponsorships. When you lose a celebrity like Hogan, you're not just losing a wrestling personality, you're losing a megastar. Nationwide, worldwide. You know, frankly, until we lose somebody like a Vince McMahon or a Ric Flair, I don't think you're going to hear this kind of press or coverage about a pro wrestling death to the level you're going to hear when it comes to a guy like Hogan. Like, even people that stopped watching wrestling when they outgrew it over time, those people are talking about it with friends and family. People that watched Hogan at the height of his popularity in the 80s and the 90s. Late 90s. So if anything, if you're somebody that actually likes to hear a contradictory thought, or above all else, someone that can rationally toe the line without forcing opinions or thoughts on other people, first of all, get out of the cesspool that is social media. Just don't even look at any of that stuff, okay? And before you jump to the conclusions and immediately tweet burn in hell or the world is better off without Hogan around, understand that without Hulk Hogan, the current WWE product that you see today would not exist in its current form, for better or worse. And we can certainly have that discussion, but the one thing I'm glad to see is that WWE isn't completely blackballing Hogan from existence like they did with Benoit. You know, even though the company tried to erase Hogan about a decade ago when all the scandals were coming to fruition, it's good to see them backpedal and recognize how integral Hogan was to the industry. Whether you like it or not, there will never be another Hulk Hogan replacement. Lord knows Vince tried for years to find his replacement Hogan when he needed a new top babyface to carry the load. All those attempts flopped because there was just no way to replace the original. Cena doesn't even sniff the ass crack of Hogan's stardom. Rock? Not even close. Sorry, not sorry. And it's a true shame that I don't think we're ever going to be able to properly have a discussion about Hulk Hogan without indirectly mentioning Terry Bollea. I mean, they are theoretically the same person. It's just that one version of that man drew a shit ton of money and became an all-time great. And the other version is a man that you wish probably would have been kept behind closed doors, never to be seen by the public eye. So now that the main story has been covered, I guess we can try to do a palate cleanser here. Referring to Retro Raw as a palate cleanser in any universe is outrageous. You know, but given the circumstances with Hogan, it's kind of hard for any retro discussion to really follow that news. But we'll try and chug through this one. I'll do my best to make it entertaining as everybody's still grieving the loss of an icon. I'm still currently grieving the loss of Psycho Sid. And he's been gone for, what, a little under a year now, right? I think it'll officially be a year in August. That one still hit me harder than I expected. I actually remember exactly where I was when that happened. I was driving in to do drumline instruction, and I just happened to be looking at my phone. There was the article. Psycho Sid passed away. And especially with me having been such a huge fan of Sid growing up, that really sucked. I'm glad to know I wasn't in the minority, judging how the crowd responded when he came out for his match this week. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I don't think there's ever been a period I've been alive where I watched Psycho Sid and didn't see him get the ovation he did. He was just always over. No matter where he worked, what time period, whether he was a face or a heel, it never mattered, dude. He was just so fucking popular all the time. He came out for his match with Justin Hawk Bradshaw, and it may as well have been the semi-main event at WrestleMania. These people lit up when Sid came out for his entrance. God, it was remarkable. And don't get me wrong, there was absolutely nothing to the segment. Sid and Bradshaw did like 3 or 4 moves before Bradshaw got disqualified for using his bull rope. And then as he and Dutch tried a double clothesline spot on Sid, they both wound up getting taken out and killed with jackknife power bombs. I love the idea that Dutch signed off on taking a powerbomb from Sid on a random episode of Raw. Out of all the managers in the WWF at this time, Dutch was easily the most useless. And I don't even mean that as a direct insult, because Dutch Mantell was great, but he's never really done anything on television to warrant or justify taking a bump for one of the baby faces. I mean, I don't ever recall him interfering in a match, period. But he decided to be a sport and take a powerbomb from Sid this week. Good for him. So that was the first 5 minutes of the show. And up until Austin and Taker in the main event, it was really the only other redeeming quality about this episode. What wasn't redeeming was the pre-tape promo with Sonny and Farouk that followed. Not because it was a bad promo, it was just bad because Farouk was dressed in that ridiculous gladiator getup. For anyone that missed last week's Raw report, go listen to my rant about the god-awful gimmicks going on around this time. Farouk Assad was no exception to the rule. It was just goofy because, I mean, Ron Simmons was always a natural talker. So literally, the only thing I could think while he's trying to cut this promo on Ahmed Johnson here, this is just Ron Simmons in a cheap Halloween costume playing a character. You know, all in an effort to slam his foot in the door before he even got a chance. It also turned out to be a totally pointless promo in hindsight, because they ended up promoting a title match at SummerSlam between Ahmed and Farouk. As far as I know, I'm pretty sure the whole point of that angle the other week was to write Ahmed off television because of a legit injury. So I don't even know why they bothered to advertise an IC title match. That took us back to the ring for Vader versus Mark Marrow. And the only good thing about this match was Jim Cornette on commentary working the role of me, the logical wrestling fan, where he was trying to make sense of anything Marrow did offensively. My favorite was the spot where Marrow did a somersault kick into Vader coming off the ropes. Jim's exact quote, "What the heck was that?" I wondered the same thing. It was both dumb and illogical. The announcers spent most of the match plugging the Raw Invitational Battle Royal next week, where the winner gets a WWF title shot the night after SummerSlam. So, well, Vader got the heat on Marrow through most of it. They set up the comeback spot when Vader tried to taunt Sable on the floor. That also meant Sable had to pretend to be scared. I've seen porn actresses look more convincing in selling fear. And so it led to Marrow doing a bunch of shit that Vader couldn't possibly feed for. The best was when he went to do a sunset off the top and just ended up taking a back bump because Vader was nowhere close to being in position. He also nearly decapitated Marrow's head with a sit-out splash. And then he caught Marrow with a power slam off the top and pinned him. It was humorous hearing JC call Vader a big dummy when he was getting his ass kicked during the comeback. Funny in the sense that I think most people would have presumed it was storyline related. I'm pretty sure it's not. I think that was just Jim being Jim. I mean, I could be wrong. To my recollection, I don't think Vader and Cornette ever got sideways with one another on television. I'm pretty sure they end up staying on the same page until Vader ends up going with Paul Bearer later on, which I'm not even going to pretend to remember how that whole thing went down. I do know that Paul ends up managing Vader at some point in 97. Then we go directly from that to this in-ring confrontation between Cornette and Jose Lothario. And I think the best way I can accurately describe this by the time it was over, discount the angle with Mankind and Shawn Michaels, which I'll cover in a second here. This is a 5-minute segment that wound up being a big ball of nothing by the end. I'm convinced they were just out there to kill time. Here's basically what happened. Now, you remember back at the pay-per-view, there was an angle they shot between Cornette and Lothario during the free-for-all where Corny got laid out and humiliated. So Cornette called Lothario down to the ring so he could essentially read him the riot act and explain how he was going to get even for what he did. And you might be thinking, well, this must be an elaborate scheme on Corny's part. I'm sure he has a 10-slide PowerPoint presentation to explain how he's going to enact his revenge. Well, here's the revenge plan. He's going to get even by mocking him when Vader wins the title from Shawn. I'm not even joking. That is basically what Jim said here. Jose Lothario, you're irrelevant, old, and broken down. The only reason you're here is because Shawn saw you as a childhood hero and wanted you to train him. But after Vader wins the title, you won't be needed anymore. So you can go crawling back to your farmland in San Antonio and rot on your back porch. I'm sorry, what? That's your big revenge plan, Corny? You're going to wait for him to rot into obscurity? I mean, it's cruel-hearted, sure, but why not just hit him in the back of the head with a tennis racket? Or have Vader kill him with a Vader bomb? I guess Corny's thinking long game. I'm being too short-sighted. But yeah, this is a complete waste of time. It did set up the angle, though, where Shawn was watching on a monitor in the back. And at some point during the manager tirade, Mankind came in and put Shawn in the mandible claw. And, well, admittedly, at the time they did the angle, it did seem a tad random. Just having Mankind arbitrarily show up and choke out the world champion when he's been busy feuding with The Undertaker for months. Like, where did this come from? I mean, yeah, it's going to set up a title program between the two for the next In Your House later on. I think the September pay-per-view, if I'm not mistaken. Which, I mean, yes, you can make the argument, wow, that's incredibly moronic. Now they basically just spoiled two big match outcomes for SummerSlam. In retrospect, yeah. It is kind of silly to do something like this when you never really teased any previous on-screen animosity between the two. And you're shooting this prior to the two big blow-offs between Vader, Shawn, and Taker Mankind. Could you possibly telegraph the finishes anymore? That's a smart fan in me talking, but I also understand that most people would never even conceived of the idea at the time. I'm just too jaded as a fan. Guilty as charged. So then we had Davey Boy versus the Hog Farmer, which was absolutely marvelous, let me tell you. Totally kidding. Oh, by the way, guess what we're getting on Raw next week? Aldo Montoya versus Jerry Lawler. Fucking epic. Yeah, that match right there, that'll help turn the ratings around. What do you mean the WWF is losing their ass to WCW right now in the ratings war? They're booking Aldo Montoya versus Jerry the King Lawler with 7 days billed. How could they possibly lose with that match on the card? Probably the same way they lost in the ratings by doing British Bulldog versus Henry Godwin. So this match was cock. Thank fucking Christ for Owen Hart, man. He was the only reason this segment didn't put me to sleep. I completely had this match on in the background while I was listening to Owen's commentary. I had a couple other things I needed to do, so I had the audio going while I was attending to duty. There's a moment in this match where Owen's talking about his wrist injury and the fact that it hasn't properly healed. Keep in mind, Owens had this fucking cast on for like 5 goddamn months. It's a total kayfabe injury. And he basically let the cat out of the bag when Vince asked him about his recovery period. Owen goes, "In a few months, the doctor said I should be good to take the cast off." Then Vince responds, "A few months? It only takes 6 weeks for a bone to heal." And then Owen retorts, "Not when you wrestle the schedule I do." It's fucking great stuff. That had to have been a hidden message directed at Vince. Owen telling him, "Yeah, your road schedule sucks, dude. My body never gets a chance to heal working the dates you make us work. You old scumbag." The fact that this match went through a commercial should have been enough to justify the WWF losing in the ratings this week. It just went on and on and on. I don't even remember what the hell happened at the finish. All I remember is Davey hitting Godwin with a power slam, and then they cut to a shot of the Godwin slop at ringside, which looked like a pile of antipasti. And or a pasta salad if you're somebody that likes black olives and tomatoes. I now just ruined anybody ever wanting to eat a pasta salad ever again. I apologize. Oh, by the way, here's a totally random thing that everybody completely forgot about, myself included. Do you remember the angle they shot months ago when Mark Henry debuted on Raw to press slam Lawler? Yeah, I totally forgot about that until they showed the clip again. For the record, that segment aired on March 11th of this year, pre-WrestleMania. It is almost August. Crazy. can't remember, was Mark Henry actually training during this time, or was he still injured? I can't remember what the hell happened. But that gap between his debut and the actual match with Lawler is astonishing. 6+ months. Well, the good news, despite all the hideous content we've been subjected to, show wasn't a total lost cause. The TV main event somewhat saved it. It was not the best match in their soon-to-be storied rivalry, but even a solid, unmemorable Undertaker versus Stone Cold match is far superior to most of the other junk we were getting here in 1996. It was definitely a sign of things to come over the next few years. And the Undertaker-Austin chemistry was always on point. And speaking of signs of things to come, you can throw Foley into the equation too, because he had some involvement at the end of this segment. Taker, Foley, Austin. 3 core foundations of the Attitude Era. Now all we're missing is Rock and heel Vince McMahon. There's your sort of Mount Rushmore. Anyway, it's a perfectly sound match. I always love watching Austin and Taker work together. They did pretty much spoil the finish ahead of time when they showed Mankind walking through the back toward the ring before a commercial. But Austin got a chance to work over Taker. There was a sweet setup for the tombstone spot where Taker chokeslammed Austin off the top and kind of turned it into a modified boss man slam on the way down. I think I've seen Taker do that before, but nothing stood out immediately, so it looked cool. But right as he's about to snatch Austin for the tombstone, here comes Mankind down the aisleway. So Taker cut him off with a pass. Those two started going at it. The thing I found funny is that Austin wins the match on a countout. They didn't even wait like a full minute before Taker came back to just hit Austin with the tombstone anyway. He's like, nah, that doesn't work for me, brother. I gotta get my shit in. I mean, considering where both guys were in the pecking order for SummerSlam, Taker needed the endorsement here more. The Paul Bearer involvement in this program has been very weird from the jump. And I already know what's upcoming in the Boiler Room match, so none of this is surprising in the slightest. But even going back and watching the build-up to the match, there's never any subtle tease about the relationship between Mankind and Paul. Like, Paul's there, but he's mostly been in the background through a lot of the inner brawling between Foley and Taker. So, in that sense, you could kind of foresee that something was coming. It was just very odd to see Paul not really be a central part at the beginning of the rivalry. Little did we know what was to come. But yeah, the two good things about the show, Psycho Sid and Taker versus Austin in the main event. Maybe you toss in Owens commentary. But you remove the opener and the main event on a whole, you're left with a whole lot of rubbish in the middle. It's like having a slop sandwich without the bread. At least they toned down the rotten gimmicks this week. Yeah, Aldo Montoya still made a cameo, but it was the only rotten gimmick as opposed to like 4, which is what we got last week. And the show really suffered as a result. But it was more than that. like we talked about the other week, man, WCW was miles ahead of the WWF during this time period. In terms of booking, talent, intrigue, business, gates. Like, there was no competition. It was the Monday Night War without the war part. The only war the WWF is fighting right now is with themselves in order to stay in business. SummerSlam 96 is only 3 weeks out, and the card is just so lackluster right now. I mean, you got Shawn and Vader, which everybody knows how that went down. The only other hook for that card is the Boiler Room match between Taker and Foley. But outside those two programs, I mean, you're basically left with a whole lot of filler in the middle. And even when you kind of look at the scope of the television show, you can kind of see the WWF already looking past SummerSlam. Hell, they already let you know what the next main event for In Your House 10 is going to be in September. Yeah, that's when you know the company's in bad shape. And simultaneously setting themselves up for a bad SummerSlam. Let's throw one of the big fours under the bus to set up a buffer pay-per-view. Troubling times. But yeah, sorry for the somewhat low-key Raw report there, but, again, man, the Hulk Hogan business is really sort of the only thing that people care about right now. And it's going to be interesting to see how that goes in the news cycle. Like I said with the WWE, at least they acknowledged it, but I don't know. It's hard to tell if they were just kind of paying their homage and now they want to kind of swipe all that under the bus and move on. Or who knows, maybe they'll talk about Hogan some more on television and pay him an actual tribute. It's hard to say. But we'll leave it at that. As always, feel free to comment down below or share your thoughts. If you have any Hulk Hogan memories that you want to chime in with, by all means, go ahead. Love him, hate him. The guy had a legacy. And for some people, it's bittersweet. So, on that note, we'll come back on the Friday show, and it will just be Mid-South and World Class. They did not do a taping block for WCW the week after the Great American Bash, so it will be a 2-part segment this coming Friday. So, just to keep that on your radar. Anyway, take care, everybody, and thanks for checking out the show. Peace out.